Thank you all. Welcome to Filed Live. I'm Anthony Goodwood. I really appreciate you hopping on to today's webinar and podcast. With me today is my guest, Brenda Prowse. Brenda is one of the key RecordPoint consultants, very much a very key member of the team, focused on information management and knowledge management and policy development. Brenda, do you want to give a little bit of a background on your bio and say hi to the audience?
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And I am, as Anthony mentioned, a principal consultant with RecordPoint. I've been in records and information management for just over 30 years. In the records field, on the ground, working as a government archivist type of job, but I've also been in the consulting profession now for about 20 years and consulting on the likes of EDRMS products, and RecordPoint being the newest one in my portfolio. And happy to be here.
Fantastic. It's really great to have you. I know the wealth of knowledge you bring and love the conversations we get to have. Today, we're really going to focus on ChatGPT, some of the changes that are happening in the industry and the potential role and impact that those changes are going to have on our everyday lives, particularly for those that come, have an information governance position description or part of their position description. And I know we have a lot of questions that some people have sent in earlier, and I do want to call out if anyone has any questions that they would like Brenda or myself to answer, please throw them into the chat box, and we will monitor those and make sure that we address them as we go. But let's kick off without any further ado and really dive in. Brenda, I've certainly been thinking, and there's a lot of early information out there about ChatGPT or other large language models, and how they can impact records management. I mean, what are you seeing?
Well, I've been seeing a slower adoption here in the North, as we call it, Northern Hemisphere with RecordPoint. But there certainly is a recognition that it can assist with things like classification and sentiment analysis and things like job descriptions. All you have to do is plug into it, create a job description for a records management director, and boom, there is something there for you. So it's pretty amazing what it can do to help your everyday life as a records person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth probably giving the audience a little bit of detail. There's quite a few different variations. We all see in the media, ChatGPT mentioned a lot, and a lot of people talking about ChatGPT. But ChatGPT is not the only large language model out there, is it?
No, it's not. And there are many. I'm thinking Microsoft has one now, right?
Yeah, Microsoft Copilot. Yep.
Yep. So there are quite a few out there. ChatGPT, I guess, came out first, and or certainly was a good free version for anybody out there looking to toy around with it. You can sign up for it right away.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun to dive in and get there. But there's also another implementation from Google, which is called Bard. So bard.google.com. That also is fun. You can sign up for that one. They're all very similar in nature, with some slight different biases, and we'll probably get into that a little later in the conversation. Ultimately, this technology is really based on newer AI implementations known as large language models. And really what that is a very, very large parsing of all of the information that's sitting on the internet. I mean, that's really what these things are a representation are, aren't they?
Yeah, that's exactly what they are. And it's quite brilliant how they can assist with records management and our daily activities. Thinking years ago how long it would take us, sometimes depending on the size of the organization, it could take you a few years to inventory your information, then create a classification scheme, which was suddenly out of date because you've taken too long to do it. And within minutes, you can have the start of a classification scheme right at your fingertips.
Do you think that, it's an interesting area? So using ChatGPT or another large language model to develop a classification scheme is really has a lot of flexibility. Have you had a go at that?
I have had a go at it. And what's really fascinating is that you can use it for your jurisdiction. So I've been watching colleagues type in something for Australia, but I've tried it out for Canada as well. And, you can look at creating a specific jurisdictional, not just classification scheme, but also retention schedule. Now, of course, it's not going to be perfect. It's just a start, but at least it started, and it's not something that took you years to create and research.
Is that right? So in the past, you've really seen these things take this could take years off a project.
Oh, I've seen it take years. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow, and that's and this is an amazing shortcut then to be able to use this kind of technology to fast track the development of a file plan. Then,
Yep, I can see it fast tracking that, the file plan, the retention schedules, it surveys that, job descriptions, as we mentioned before, perhaps policy development. There's just so much that we could consider doing with this. Now, of course, we are often, as records people, a little bit apprehensive about things for many reasons. I mean, is it going to be wrong? Well, yes, sometimes it will be. That's why we have to do the secondary level of research to make sure it's okay. But, from your perspective, what do you see maybe that LLMs might not be good at?
yeah, it's a great question. All the different implementations of large language models are pretty similar in how they work. And I mean, first off the bat, it's not a search engine, so it's not ask me for a fact, retrieve a fact. It just doesn't work that way. What it is summarizing data, and when you summarize data, you do have the potentiality of misinterpreting elements of that summary, which I think goes back to your point of needing to check things coming out of these large language models, because they can develop or have information coming out in the summary that actually is somewhat made up or somewhat what they would call a hallucination in the output. So it's not a search engine. Don't use it as a Google, because it's not. It's very much a way to generate a machine response from a question is really its purpose. The other side as well is it's really good at generating as you say, an early starting point, a summary piece of information, a job description, those really well-known and public pieces of data. If you really think about the kind of data that are in there, it will have parsed every single job ad that's ever been added on the internet. That's a lot of position descriptions and a lot of information that's gone in there, but it doesn't have the internal information that you have in your organization. You can technically join those things, so it does have exposure to it. And there's a bunch of issues that we'll talk about in a minute that does bring up, but it is really a way, I think, using LLMs to generate a first draft that is pretty basic, because it doesn't have the nuances or the sophistication to get into the specialization of particular things. So, very much use it to generate something like a position description is a great example. Then you can fine tune that once it's generated. Generating a fairly generic email to congratulate people. I used it just the other day to congratulate a colleague on achieving a milestone. Please don't let them know I was cheating, but I was pressed for time, and it did a fantastic job at that. But if you wanted to ask it to, write the strategy for how the world can attack the nuance of climate change in Seattle, where I am today, it really doesn't do a great job at that. There's just not a lot of specific information to that particular example, so it gives you pretty generic answers.
Well, we have to understand that it's only as good as the information that has been fed, and of course, that information may not be current as well, because ChatGPT has been until recently, for sure, basing information on up to September, I think, of 2021. So
yeah, I think in ChatGPT 3.5 they brought forward a little bit, and ChatGPT 4 there are some different versions there. These are still very new technologies, and I think even with the issue of there is the data in it is already a little bit old. It isn't current. That is definitely the case. That they are amending that, but it is in order to be current, it's going to take up it's going to be, we're still not quite there yet in terms of these technologies. The other element I think around that currency piece is it is only as good as you say to the information it's been fed. And whilst certainly here at RecordPoint, we've been doing some work to look at how we can join your internal information with a ChatGPT and then bring that mix together. By default, that's not going to be the case. You'll need additional technologies to achieve that.
That's right. And I mean, records managers know fact check everything anyway. It's part of the DNA. So we've talked a bit about the hallucinations. Anthony, do you know any way that people could spot those easily, or is that just again down to your fact checking?
Yeah, it's really down to your fact checking. I think there's a fairly famous as in yeah, as in it was in the media, hallucination not so long ago, where I think it was a lawyer in Pittsburgh, where they had used ChatGPT against a particular case they were working on for a filing that was going into court, and the individual who'd done that hadn't really checked anything. And those hallucinations in this case was that ChatGPT had just made up a whole bunch of precedents. It had cited cases that just did not exist. And obviously, when the filing went through, that was not a great outcome for that person's client or that firm's client, because it was completely made up and just not reviewed. So these biases and hallucinations in particular, they're not happening, like they're not something that you see a lot of, but it is important to go and do that checking. You can't just completely rely on that. But I liken that really to any consultant you bring in the organization. You can't bring an external consultant in, have them come in and write you a report and then not read it and check it. If I was to present that to my board or present it to, a customer from a consultant that we brought in the organization, you've got to read it, you've got to check it, you've got to make sure that information is there. This is just another tool like that.
Absolutely. Good analogy, Anthony, because yes, I would agree with you. And I always say to clients that you are the subject matter experts on your organization. So anything I say should be checked against not just best practice, but what is going on internally to make sure that I've got it right.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting though with these technologies using ChatGPT or large language models for records managers, you can ask them to um, uh, give you back the citation, give you back some of the referencing, and then try and follow that information through. Again, you've got to do that checking
Yeah.
and make sure that referencing is still valid. But I think it's such a normal activity for all of us in the information governance space to do that kind of checking that will come quite naturally anyway.
Yeah, I agree. So thinking about LLMs, our large language models, again with records management, it can do a lot for us, as we've mentioned, but there are things it can't do. It's not a storage facility, it's not applying security, and it's not applying the compliance, even if it's helping us find the citations. So, it's not a be all end all, but it certainly is a good starting point. And I think, as you and I talked about recently, it's far better to edit something than it is to create from scratch. So, if we have that starting point, then that's amazing. I actually recently put in, do me a Canadian utility classification scheme. And I would say it was less than a minute and it popped up
Wow.
with a classification scheme. Oh, yeah. It was incredible. And then tried for the retention with it. And that also was less than a minute. So in 2 minutes, I had my starting point, which is brilliant.
That's fantastic. And what do you think that will do with the workflow of a person, working in a records role, having to deal with all the different pressures that happen on a day-to-day basis? Where will this fit in?
I could see it fitting in if you're just starting out and you don't have anything in place. It's a great way to get all of those pieces at play without spending hours, months doing it. I've seen certain policies take years to develop. So it's good to have that really solid starting point that really takes from a lot of information across the world. I mean, you never want to reinvent the wheel. And this is actually taking all the wheels that exist and just creating something new out of them. And, it's your way forward. But even if you already have policies, it might be a great way to update them or update your classification scheme, because you're looking at some more current information that maybe you don't have time to research fully, but then you can go back and fact check, and that's a little easier to do later. So I see it making life a lot easier down the road. We as records managers are not always quick to adopt new technologies. And of course, there's always a fear that technology is going to erase or eradicate certain roles in the organization. But I see this as a way to enhance what you're doing, and not be afraid. Jump into it.
No, fantastic. And this is, do you see this technology is a little different to some of the other waves? Like, what's your perception around its utility? I think a lot. Where I'm going with that question is that a lot of the technology that's come out has been very much for technologists. Isn't it great? We've got Kubernetes and Docker containers, and computers will run faster, and it really hasn't impacted the records management industry in the main. This technology is different as far as that goes, isn't it?
Yeah, I would see it as more accessible and user friendly. I mean, it's just as easy as typing in a question and getting a full response, and then you can ask it to further hone the response. I mean, and it's not a programming activity or a coding activity, and that makes it far more accessible to the average person who is not really technically literate. So that to me is absolutely everything. And since COVID, as we talk about the world now, everything's before since COVID and everybody working from home much more, the explosion of data is so huge that you can't really wrap your head around how much you have, what you have, where it is, what to do with it. And I see this as helping manage that plethora of information that is such an explosion. And as well, trying to manage it without too much intervention on the part of the users, because they're sitting at their desktop and historically have fought against having to worry about records management. And I see this as helping get rid of that layer for them and let them just work and not actually have to think about when do I get rid of something, or should I put it somewhere. I'll just keep going, and the records managers have a better sense of what is going on with the data in their organizations. This electronic information explosion age is just gone beyond what you can actually handle without using some sort of technology.
No, great. I think you're right. That notion of being able to augment your processes and how you do things on a daily basis with this kind of tooling is going to have a big impact. I think switching gears a little bit, and I think you sort of brought up there the notion of where data is stored, and it's in a plethora of systems, and there's changes going on. What do you see? What's your forecast over the next 12, 18 months, and how do you see these kind of technologies, but also other technologies that are out there impacting the world of records management? Where are your hopes and dreams?
My hopes and dreams are that we can get our heads around all of this information. It is far too much. I'm seeing it every day with clients. Dark data. We don't know where everything is. Our file shares have become a tangled mess. We don't know what's in there. It's the wild, wild west. And I see these technologies helping us harness that information, and not just harness it so that we manage it appropriately, but harness it so we can use it for decision making in our organizations, because I'm sure that there are hidden gems that could be helping the organization work better, smarter, faster. And I see these technologies as helping us get there.
No, great. And what if I was to say, look, thinking out and knowing what you're seeing as trends here with your experience in the industry, what do you think things are going to look like in 10 years from now, 15 years from now? What are going to be the big impacts and changes?
The big impacts. That's a very good question, and I'm going to be retired. No, just a joke. I'm hopeful.
Nobody retires. You just become a consultant. That's yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm hopeful that we all do have a better sense of our information in our organizations. And I know paper is going nowhere. They've been telling us for, 30 years that paper is going to go away. It's not, but it certainly has reduced. And I have seen that and seen the results of that in many organizations. So, the electronic will be the be all end all. And I hope that I see more, contract signings online. You don't have to put pen to paper anymore for that. And it's really going in that direction. I bought a house a few years ago and the whole transaction was electronic. I did not sign one thing between the bank, the lawyers, everything. I signed everything online. So, COVID kind of accelerated that process. So those are the kinds of things I'd like to see happening. That's the world goes completely electronic, and we can harness the information, harvest what we need, and manage it appropriately.
Do you see, I'm putting you on the spot, but we've seen the new standards come out from the Department of Defense here in the US recently, which is far more geared to an electronic world than what we saw with DoD 5015. Do you see
Yes.
those kind of changes reverbing through the standards processes and a better understanding of then how things like ChatGPT and other things will be leveraged into that? Is that the evolution track?
Because DoD has changed their direction, I see that reverberating, yes, throughout, because they were always the de facto standard. So when they say something, the world listens. And the world of records management and records management solutions, we listen. So that will, I think, funnel through, and they have to address the new technologies. There's no choice. There has to be recognition that how these things are affecting the workforce, our users, and how they interact with the systems that they're using on a day-to-day basis. I also hope that this technology, I guess, explosion with things like AI and ChatGPT and LLMs, that we are able to address things like the GDPR and privacy legislations far easier and more smartly, because we can now access where those repositories are. We know where our private data is, and then we can understand better how to use it and get rid of it when we're supposed to. So I do see that that changing for the better.
Yeah, it is a dichotomy, right? I think the things like ChatGPT and OpenAI do have some privacy implications, don't they? Around they can surface that data accidentally. Your
Yeah,
data is no doubt in there, although it is anonymized. If you're taking some of your internal data and mixing that, there's a lot of things to think about in that context.
that's right.
But the regulations on the other side are changing quite quickly. We have the privacy legislation that's rolling out across the United States in a range of different states. We're really seeing that activity occur, and there's new legislation going into Canada, Bill 64 in Ontario, and then further legislation, I believe, in front of the Canadian federal government. So there is a real swirl of change now. Most, if not all, of that privacy legislation has records elements in it, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, it always will. And it will point uh, to the responsibility of the management of that information and the consequences as well of the mismanagement of that information. And while that is in those policies, the responsibility is on the records person normally to figure it out. Now, we also have a lot of privacy positions as well, but those people have to figure out where are these gems hidden in these policies and how on earth do I implement them. And I think these technologies that we're talking about are the way to help us implement those items within those policies that are making sure we manage people's information appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're certainly seeing as a wave out there is the real need to manage disposal, because that's really what we're talking about when we get to
Yes.
privacy. Is it's not holding on to data over the long term, only holding on to what you need. Obviously they're fundamental records management concepts that we've had for some time, but they're now reverberating into a new domain that's driving some of these processes, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not always been easy to surface that data. So, using, technology such as this to actually access and understand what you have so that you do dispose of it in a timely fashion, yes, certainly is going to be the wave for the future.
No, great. So if I was to think back through your career and some of the changes that you've seen, what do you think is the biggest hurdles we have? And we talked a little bit around finding the data and being able to move the data. But what do you think the biggest hurdles we have in the industry are, and how do we attack those?
Uh, you know what? Some of the biggest hurdles are more people related than they
Hmm.
are technology related. We as records managers do want to dispose of things in a fashion that's appropriate to our retention schedules, our legislation, our compliance needs, and getting sign off on those things is pretty difficult. Now, if we can help enhance the workflows, make them more electronic, make them a little more visible, transparent for those people that are approving those disposals, maybe that can help. But ultimately, that's the biggest challenge I see is people standing in the way of, moving things.
Yeah, look, as a technologist, I'm going to be a little rude now. The
Mhm.
wetware is the hardest thing to deal with, right? The software and the hardware, easy. The wetware is much harder.
Always has been.
No, absolutely. Look, I think that you've done a fantastic job, Brenda, in explaining some of the concepts and the key relationship that ChatGPT has to the everyday environment of a records manager. Is there any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to bring out?
I think the main thing is to not be afraid of it. Understand that change is constant and we can't avoid it. So get out there, get your free sign up to ChatGPT, test it out for yourself, see what it can do. Find out for yourself what you believe the shortcomings are. Make sure you research if you use it and don't take everything as gospel because remember that technology is only as good as the information it's been fed. So just but embrace it, move forward with it. It is the wave of the future.
Terrific. Look, I thank everybody for making some time and jumping on our AMA today. We'd really like to get some feedback whether this information is useful and you found this useful. We, really value the input and the questions and the conversation. So thank you for attending, and thank you, Brenda, for coming on and giving us a whole bunch of. You're sharing your experiences with us. You're a really key part of RecordPoint. So thank you for everything you do, and really appreciate the opportunity to have had the conversation today.
Thanks, Anthony. It's been fun.